Hi, hello, welcome to LearnStroke IAS classes by Arjun. You're listening to the daily Hindu news analysis with IAS News Leads with Arjun R Shankar. Let's find out the important news that came in today's newspaper with GS paperwise perspective. First one, DMK seeks review of Supreme Court verdict on 10% EWS quota. So this brings us an important question of what do you mean by EWS and what is the 10% quota? Because recently in DMK filed a petition in the Supreme Court to review its judgment holding the 10% quota granted to economically weaker section in government jobs and education institution, saying that the leeway has made a large section of upper caste population eligible for easy, exclusive, luxurious reservation. So, what is the point of giving the upper class people an exclusive luxurious reservation? Is the question that has been asked. And you should know that the EWS certificate can be used to avail the 10% reservation for the general economically weaker section in higher education all over India and government jobs. So, what do you mean by in a landmark decision, the Supreme Court held the 103 constitutional amendment providing a 10% reservation quota for EWS from unreserved category. So, what do you mean by EWS quota is the next important question. What are the criterias and who can avail the EWS quota? The central government has put forward 10% reservation for the economical weaker section of the society through the 103 constitution amendment, and the amendment was passed in January 2019, through which article 15 clause 6 and 16 clause 6 were inserted in the constitution reservation. The amendment empowers state government to provide reservation in college admission and government job based on the criteria of economic backwardness. So, under the EWS quota, a person belonging to the general category with an annual household income of up to rupees 8 lakh are eligible for the reservation, excluding families that own 5 acres of agricultural land, a house over 1000 square feet, and a plot of over 100 yards in a notified municipal area. So these are some of the important aspects regarding. So GS paper 2 polity and governance perspective, you should know what do you mean by EWS quota and what is the Supreme Court decision on that. Let me give you three important key questions for GS paper 2 polity and governance perspective. Do you think the 103rd constitution amendment breaches the basic structure of the constitution, and does it permit the state to make a special provisions for reservation based on economic criteria? Does the EWS quota breach the basic structure by permitting the state to make special provisions in relation to admission to private aided institution? Or is the 103 amendment constitutional in excluding SC, ST and OBC from the scope of EWS reservation analyzed? So three questions, very important question from the perspective of GS paper 2, polity and governance. Moving on to the next important question is Supreme Court offers to find solutions to deceitful conversions. So GS paper 2 polity and governance. So now everybody is talking about the conversion process, that is forceful conversion that is happening in Gujarat, and Gujarat has been come to the limelight and regarding this. So everybody has a right to choose their faith, but does not mean luring somebody by giving something. If you believe that a particular community needs help, you help it. It is charity. But the purpose of charity should not be conversion. So the Supreme Court said acts of charity or good work to help a community or poor should not have an intention to convert them religiously as a payback. So a bench led by Justice M.R. Shah said conversion on the basis of voluntarily felt belief in the deity of a different faith was different from belief gained through allurement. So you cannot make someone allure to it. And this is what the Supreme Court said. Everybody has a right to choose their faith. That does not mean that they should be lured to something. And the article also talks about Solicitor General of India. So GS paper 2 polity, who is the Solicitor General? The Solicitor General is subordinate to the Attorney General of India. They are the second highest law officer of the country, assist the Attorney General, and is assisted by additional Solicitor General. So you should know that they advise, the Solicitor General of India advise the government and appear on behalf of Union of India in terms of law officers. However, unlike the post of Attorney General is actually a constitutional post under the Article 76 of the Constitution, The Solicitor General and Additional Solicitor General are merely statutory positions. So, GS Paper 2 position. India Germany Inc. Migration Agreement. So, this is another GS Paper 2 International Relations, Indo German relation. The article talks about India's consumption of Russian oil is just one sixth of European consumption, and the relationship talk about launching an oil price cap planned by the G7 countries and European Union to withdraw shipping and insurance services to country that buy Russian oil above the barrel price of $60 a barrel. So there is an oil price cap done by the G7 and European countries that any withdraw shipping and insurance services to countries that buy Russian oil above the $60 barrel. And India and Germany has also signed a partnership agreement regarding the mobility to ease travel for research, study, and work for people in both countries. So, GS Paper 2, International Relations Perspective. Mehbooba Mufti's new residence fails to get security clearance from the J&K police. So, this brings us an important concept of Lieutenant Governor's administration, because under Section 2 and Section 5 of the J&K Public Premises Act 1988, Miss Mufti and her family failed to leave the bungalow when the Muftis had been stationed since 2005. So this is also another important because the Jammu and Kashmir was reduced to a union territory in 2019. So ex-chief ministers were no longer offered rent-free residential accommodation. So this brings us what is the power of lieutenant governor, know the functions, power and the role of lieutenant governors in India. GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance. So who is the lieutenant governor? Know the functions, power and role. Moving on, the flow of spurious liquor drugs in Punjab will finish off the youth, says Supreme Court. So GS Paper 1, Society Perspective, you should know the unbridled flow of drugs and liquor will finish off the youth of the border state of Punjab and the entire country, says Supreme Court. So this is a very serious issue because consumption of drugs is increasing, and if somebody wants to finish off the country, since Punjab is a border state, an action has to be taken. It will be very easy to finish the youth by drugs and liquor. So it's a very important question regarding the societal aspect of liquor and drugs in the youth of the country, especially in Punjab. Moving on to the next is Maharashtra ministers barred from entering Karnataka's Belgavi district. GS Paper 1, Society, Regionalism, GS Paper 2, and the border issues of states. This is all regarding the Belgavi border district between Karnataka and Maharashtra. So read it from all this perspective. Yesterday we have discussed a detail regarding what is the Belgavi district issue and how during Belgavi was a part of the Bombay presidency in the British times. Next is the renovated stepwell in Bansilalpet in Sikandrabad. So this is the stepwell, the renovated stepwell at Bansilalpet in Sikandrabad. So what do you mean by a stepwell? GS Paper 1, History and Culture. What do you mean by a stepwell? A stepwell is a vav or a baudi or a bavdi, which is actually a well or a pond with a long corridor of steps. So stepwells used to play a very important architecture in India from 7th to 19th century. You can find a lot of them during the Solanki period, the Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, North Karnataka, Gujarat. You can find a large number of such stepwells. So this is actually an important way of water management during those times. So read it from GS Paper 1, History and Culture Perspective. So what is a stepwell? They must have originated different place like Rajasthan, Gujarat, etc. So know what do you mean by a stepwell. Next is Vidingham Port Project. Kerala government strikes for a solution. So you need to know what is the Vidingham project and how is Vidingham a very strategic port in India compared to the other ports in India. What is a deep sea port? What do you mean by all these concepts from GS Paper 1, Geography, and GS Paper 2, 1, Society Perspective, and know what is the important aspect regarding this. Police raid Rooster Farms arenas near Vijayawada in crackdown on cockfights ahead of the Sankranti festival. So this brings us to an important question of what is cockfighting. So GS Paper 1, History and Culture. Cockfighting is concentrated in northeastern and the southern states of India. So what is cockfighting? As in Tamil language, cockfighting is known as the Vetrical Sevel Por, and in It is Kodipandam in Telugu and Korikatta in Tulu language. So it is cockfighting is actually opposed by various aspects of the animal protection wing and various provisions of the animal laws. The cruelty against animal laws is also seen from this perspective. So read it from GS paper 1 history and GS paper 2 welfare, etc. And again, the leopard prawl in Mysore court. So everybody is talking about the leopard. So you should know from GS paper 3 environment, I mean biodiversity, animals conservation. You should know what is leopard, the difference between leopard, tiger, and how leopard conservation is an important thing in India. Please read it from that perspective. Moving on to the important editorial is faith and freedom. So this is nothing but the it is also talking about the Gujarat government is seeking the removal of a stay on a provision in its anti-conversion law that requires prior permission from the district magistrate for any conversion done directly or indirectly, because the litigation in the name of forcible religious conversion is taking up a lot of time of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is hearing a PIL regarding this. So Gujarat government wants a stay on the provision of anti-conversion law that requires the district magistrate for any conversion. And the Gujarat court had correctly stated Section 5 of the Gujarat Freedom of Religion Act 2003, which was amended in 2021. So the Gujarat government is seeking the stay of this provision. So read it from the perspective of GS paper 2 laws regulations. Next is a very important one regarding the case of change. The case of change. This is an I'll give you. This is from GS paper 2 international relations perspective. This talks about nothing but the Iran issue. The latest spell of protest began in September after the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman who was in the custody of the morality police for wearing the hijab improperly. So the whole Iran is talking for a reform in the hijab rules. Thousands of women are protesting in the streets demanding the end of mandatory hijab rules and calling for reforms in Iran. So you should know from this perspective the hijab rules, and I'll give you an essay question from this perspective. The sustainability of any system is dependent on its ability to reform from within. The sustainability of any system is dependent on its ability to reform from within is an essay question that you can just try answering. Moving on, the next important one was COVID-19 pandemic, food and socialization. So it's a very important area in the sense it talks about life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom was used to mention about the COVID pandemic. So this talks about the food expenditure, the socializing expenditure, and how the different income categories responded to the food expenditure, socialization expenditure during the COVID time. So it's basically an economic analysis of how things have changed. So GS paper 2 health and GS paper 3 economy perspective. Climate talks as short changing international law. GS paper 3 climate change environment. It talks about the COP27 and the three problems with the current negotiating process of climate. It first says that the citizens are not aware that two-thirds of their national emissions in developed countries of carbon dioxide come from their diet, transport, and it talks about the three different problems with the current climate negotiating process. And it also talks about the UN Conference on Human Environment, June 1972, which is called as the 1972 United Nations Conference on the Environment in Stockholm. The Stockholm Declaration. What is the Stockholm Declaration? Which contain 26 principles, and one of the major result of the Stockholm Conference was the creation of United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP. It also talks about the carbon budget. What do you mean by carbon budget? A carbon budget is the cumulative amount of carbon dioxide emissions permitted over a period of time to keep within a certain temperature threshold. And it also talks about a very important aspect called as mission life or lifestyle for environment. Mission life is an India-led global mass movement to nudge international, individual and community action to protect and preserve the environment. At the 26th session of COP26 in the UNFCCC held in Glasgow, India shared the mantra life, lifestyle for environment to combat climate change. India is the first country to include life in its nationally determined contribution, or NDC, something related to this. And it also talks about the Paris Agreement and the IPCC report of 2018 and the Glasgow report of 2021. So very, very important from the perspective of environment. Uh, so read it from this perspective. And moving on to the next is no uniformity in parole and furlough rules, GS paper 2, governance law relating to parole and the rights of prisoners. This is nothing but there is a huge, what is parole? What do you mean by parole? And the Prisons Act 1894 and the Prisons Act 1900. I'll give you a mains question for GS paper 2. With presence in the state list and a lack of common legal framework regarding parole and furlough can endanger the entire criminal justice system. Comment. So there was a huge uproar in the media when there is such a saw that Chief Gurmeet Singh Rahim, a convict serving 20-year prison sentence for raping two disciples, was organizing an online satsang. And on the other hand, Nalini, a convict in Rajiv Gandhi assassination, was serving life imprisonment, was given several extension of parole. So what do you mean by parole? Parole is the release of a prisoner either temporarily or special purpose or completely before the expiry of a sentence on the promise of good behavior. Such a promise is known as the word of honor in the parole order. The word parole is derived from a French word which means I give my word, the word of honor. The Prisons Act 1894 and Prisons Act 1900 did not contain any provisions regarding to the parole. However, Section 59 of the Prisons Act, the Section 59 of the Prisons Act clearly clearly said that the state can make rules for the shortening of sentences and for rewards of good conduct. The Uttar Pradesh rule provide for the suspension of sentence. The Maharashtra's rule permit release of convict on furlough for 21 to 28 days. The recently revised rule of Haryana permit regular parole to convict up to 10 weeks. So furlough is considered as an incentive for good conduct in prison. And even emergency parole is granted for people's emergency like death, serious issues like illness or marriage in the family. So read it from GS paper 2, governance and law perspective. Next is EWS quota beyond the smokescreen, GS paper 2, governance polity, because this article talks about reservation and the intent of reservation was laudable, but what was supposed to be a short-term measure got extended due to a various political and sociological compulsion. So even after 7 decades of reservation, we are not able to claim success in eliminating the cause that required reservation. However, successive governments kept extending the reservation for a long time. So people who benefited from reservation wanted this system to continue for successive generation also. So more than 70 years of reservation has brought economic prosperity. And you should know that most objections to this come from a misunderstanding that especially the EWS section is actually a violation of the basic structure of the constitution. So do you think regarding that? And a lot of resistance have come that when you give reservations to the general category, a lot of reservation has also come into this. So you should have an idea relating to this perspective. Moving on, the Prime Minister seeks cooperation of all parties to make G20 a grand success. So this is regarding GS paper 2, international relations. So you should know that previously India in the past have also chaired non-alignment movement, the NAM summit and the Commonwealth heads of government meet. So India has already chaired it previously. Moving on, need for a collective effort to highlight G20 Sherpas meet. So what is Sherpas meet? The first Sherpa meeting of India's G20 presidency was conducted recently in Udaipur, Rajasthan. And they discussed, I'll give you an essay question. Every crisis is an opportunity and leadership is all about finding path-breaking solutions in the midst of a crisis. Essay question. And what are SDG? They talk about Sustainable Development Goals. And for the past 7 years, India has been at the forefront of implementing, adopting, and monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals. which is known as the Global Goals, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030 all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The 17 SDG are integrated. There are 17 SDGs. So read about this from GS paper 3, environment, climate, and environmental perspective. Next is, well within our right to disagree with RBI, government tells Supreme Court. So Supreme Court asked the government whether it would have brushed aside objections from the RBI regarding the demonetization policy. So a new question from the Justice Abdul Nazar came after Attorney General R Venkat said that government and the RBI acted in consultation to notify demonetization. The petitioner has argued that such an important move should not have been made by a delegated legislation like a gazette notification. So the government had announced demonetization not through a parliamentary statute but by a notification in the gazette. So is this a good thing? Because demonetization was a very serious issue. GS paper 2, polity, governance, and GS paper 3 are economy perspective. What is delegated legislation? Delegated legislation simply means exercising of legislative power by agent who is lower in the rank of the legislature or who is subordinate to the legislature. Because delegation has been defined as an act of entrusting a person with the power or empowering him to act on behalf of that person who has given him that power. So that is what is called as delegation or delegated legislation. Next is, catching a small fry is not enough. Nab masterminds of drug smuggling, says finance minister. So this finance minister has asked the DRI or Department of Revenue Intelligence to capture the masterminds behind the proliferating smuggling. So what is DRI? The Directorate of Revenue Intelligence is an Indian intelligence agency. It is India's apex anti-smuggling intelligence investigation and operation agency. The directorate is run by officers from the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, CBIC, who are posted in various zonal units such as Indian embassies, customers overseas intelligence networks, etc. So read it from GS paper 1, society, and GS paper 2, regulatory bodies, etc. CPI calls for abolition of post of governor, because since governor is now facing a lot of controversies, there are several examples of how the CPI says that there is a problem in governor's office in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, even in Puducherry. So there is a big, I'm giving a question for mains from GS paper 2 perspective. In a diversified democracy like India, there is a big threat of governors acting as direct political representatives of ruling dispensation. How can it be? How can we prevent it? In a parliamentary system, do we need governors? So critically analyze. This is a statement that we need to analyze whether we need a governor system and should our governors working from the central government's dictates. So read it from GS paper 2, polity perspective. Next is panel finalizing its report on OBC subcategorization. This brings us, what is the commission for subcategorization of OBC? This is the commission for subcategorization of OBC. And what is Justice Rohini Commission? The government constituted a commission in 2nd October 2017 under Article 340 of the Constitution to examine the issues of subcategorization of other backward class. And after more than 5 years of its formation, the commission is for the subcategorization of OBC is now under final stages of finishing its task to classify nearly 3,000 caste groups and preparing a report on it. And 5-member commission Justice Rohini was constituted in 2017. Since then, the commission was supposed to give a report within 12 weeks, and since then, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment has extended the deadline 10 times. So the final reservation, so the report will come up January 31, 2023. So it's a big task given to the Rohini Commission. Moving on to the ILO meet begins today. The DG calls for social security for all. This brings us to another important area. What is ILO, or International Labour Organization, that we have discussed, that was formed in 1919 as a Treaty of Versailles after ending World War. It calls for universal and lasting peace can be accomplished only if it is based on social justice. So ILO is devoted to promote social justice and internationally recognized human and labor rights. And recently it talks about the 17th ARPM, or Asia and the Pacific Regional Meeting of ILO. So read it from GS paper 2 International Relations and GS paper 3 Labor Security. India restores visas for Britain. So India has restored e-visas for Britons wanting to visit the country. So this is a new thing. GS paper 2 International Relations. You can the facility was previously suspended during the pandemic. So now a lot of people are coming to using the e-visas. So know about this. The winter session on day one tables 33,769 crores supplementary budget. So this brings us another important area. What do you mean by a supplementary budget or supplementary grant? So GS paper 2 polity governance perspective, polity perspective and parliament, especially the budget on supplementary grant. The President of India approves new crest of Indian Navy, GS paper 3 defense. And you should see that this is the new crest of the Indian Navy, and the Navy crest has been amended to replace the foul anchor with a clear anchor. And the new design of the President's standard and color highlights India's glorious maritime heritage and symbolize proud Indian Navy. Moving on to the international, Australia begins its work on radio telescope to solve space mystery. In this regard, what do you mean by square kilometer array? The square kilometer array. You should know that when complete, these antennas and a network of dishes in South Africa will form the square kilometer array, a massive instrument that will untangle mysteries about the creation of stars and galaxy. You should know the Square Kilometer Array, or the SKA project, is an international effort to build the world's largest radio telescope with eventually over a square kilometer of collecting data. And it's an international effort to build the world's largest telescope, and conceived in 1990s and further developed in the late 2010. It will be completed by 2023-24. It will be a great thing to identify the stars and galaxies. So this is the square kilometer array. You know that Australia is massively involved in this. And what is the star kilometer array? The Labour will abolish indefensible House of Lords, says Keir Starmer. It's the Britain's Labour Party officially announced plans to abolish the country's unelected legislative chamber, the House of Lords, and replace it with an elected chamber if the party is elected. So they are going to abolish the country's unelected legislative chamber if they are in power. So GS paper to international relations. Next is acclaimed French author Dominique Lapierre dies in 91. Is very popularly known for Freedom at Midnight, the author, Freedom of Midnight and City of Joy. And he's also known for the best-selling books like City of Joy and uh, The Freedom at Midnight is a very, very seminal work. So it's a very popular book that if you read the book, that is really good. If you don't never picked up that book, please try picking it. Freedom at Midnight is a very good book. Sri Lanka seeks India's help to boost dairy products. GS paper to international relations. The Sri Lanka has sought technical assistance from India's National Dairy Development Board, or NDDB, and market leader Amul. And the partnership is not new to Sri Lanka, where former President Chandrika Kumaratunga has invited milkman Varghese Kurian to set up the Kiriya Dairy Project in Sri Lanka, named after the Sinhala word for milk, the Kiriya Dairy Project. So the island nation is about to spend 300 million on dairy imports, mostly from New Zealand. So apart from India, Sri Lanka is also exploring great collaboration with New Zealand for dairy imports. So in Sri Lanka and India regarding the dairy production, GS paper 2 international relations. Next is GS paper 3 economy. The PMI signals upbeat services overseas orders post revival. And you should know what you mean by a PMI. A PMI is nothing but the purchasing managers index is a measure of prevailing direction of economic trends in manufacture. PMI is based on a monthly survey of supply chain managers across 19 industries, both covering upstream and downstream activity. The value and movements in the PMI and its component provide insights to business decision makers, market analysts, and investors to make an economic activity or an investment. And next important article which I have missed is The PAN card could become single ID for investment approval, says Minister. The government is planning to make PAN card issued by the Income Tax Department as a single point identifier for any project related clearance and approvals in the government. So this is GS paper 3 economy. So these are some of the important news leads that we've read in today's newspaper. So read more, subscribe LearnStroke IAS classes by Arjun, and read more in this channel.